Hi there, class. Faisal coming at you with your class of the day for June, not 7th, 8th, for English grade 12 university. So, your essays should now be handed in, and I'll ask you to be patient when it comes to giving your marks back. Right? The way Google Classroom works is once I finish marking a student, I just send it back right away, right? So, I'm going to be marking your essays throughout the week, right? And, if your friend gets it on Monday and you don't have it yet, please don't email me and say, "Where's my essay?" Right? Because, again, I'm going as I go, right? My plan is to mark about 5 a day, right? So if you don't have yours at the same time as your friend, just be patient, okay? So that's what I'll say about that. And well done to everyone who's, of course, finished an essay. So, Othello is our next order of business, right? And I've posted the text of Othello yesterday on the website, right, for you to take a look at. I'll talk about that in a moment. But before we begin, you're probably wondering, all right, well, what's left, right? What do I have to do in this course over the last 3 weeks that we're in right here? So let me talk about that. So, we're going to be reading Othello, right? And every day I'll be posting a video about it, telling you a little bit about the story and everything like that. And the way you're going to be evaluated is as follows. All right. So, first of all, you're going to have weekly questions, right? Sort of like the short story questions we've already done. You're going to have weekly questions, and most of the time, what I'll do is I'll take a quote from Othello and I'll ask you guys, to analyze that type of quote, right? And give your reaction. Uh, and my plan is to do 6 of those in all, 3 per week, right? So 3 this week, starting maybe tomorrow. Actually, no, let's say the day after so that we can get a little into it. But 3 this week and 3 next week, right? So 6 in all. And they will be both reading and writing type questions, right? So that'll be the first thing. Over the next 2 weeks, 6 questions on the Google Documents or Google Classroom. There'll also be Google Meetups. The first one will be this Friday, and there'll be 3 of those in all, right? 1 this week, 1 next week, and 1 the week after. And then finally, the last thing you're going to do is a final essay, which is due June 26th, right? That final essay is going to be a little bit different from the essay you have already done because what's going to happen is you're going to pick the question, right? So you're going to be the one who decides what you want to write about and everything like that. So that's what's going to make it interesting, right? So I'll talk more about this as we go along, but essentially you will select your own topic, right? So instead of me giving you a list of questions and saying pick one, right, what you will do is you'll say, hey, I want to write about Othello and, racism or something like that. And, you'll tell me what you want to do. And that's how we will go about it. So that's the plan for the rest of the class, and I hope that makes sense, right? I don't intend to overwhelm everyone. As long as you can write this Othello essay, you will be fine. Oh, and by the way, the final essay is going to be worth 20% because it is your final CPT activity, right? And the last day is June 26th. Now then, Shakespeare. Let's talk about him. So who's Shakespeare? So he wrote during the late 16th and early 17th century. The majority of you have read Macbeth, and so I hope you guys still remember and know a thing or two about him. So the 16th and 17th century, this was a time when kings and nobles still ruled the land and the country, and when I say country, I mean England or the United Kingdom, was in the process of starting its colonization of the world, right? North America was starting to be colonized, and other places around the world were being colonized, but colonization had not reached its height yet, right? Which it would in the 19th century. So Shakespeare's a playwright in this society, and his society is a lot different from ours in terms of technology. but has some similar characteristics as well, right? And I'm not going to go through all of the details of what his society was like, right? I mean, if you would like to know, I can answer that maybe another day. But in terms of what his society wanted, well, the key thing for understanding Shakespeare is to know that, Shakespeare, first of all, the reason he's writing is one reason primarily, and that's for money, right? So Shakespeare doesn't write his plays for his passion or because he likes writing so much or for art or any of those kind of things that he wants to make something beautiful or anything like that. Shakespeare's objective when he's writing is to make money, but not in a bad way. He wants to sell out his plays and get people talking about him so that they bring all their friends to see it, right? So his objective when he's writing his plays is to, well, run a business, right? And to get people coming to see his plays, right? And that's very similar to what they do in Hollywood nowadays. Shakespeare's theater looks like this, right? It's got all these seats, right? And you charge more for the people up here in these boxes, right? Because that was considered elite, right? You could sit down there. There would be cushions in the seats, whereas the common folk would be sitting down here, up at the front. Personally, I would prefer to be, in the standing area. But that's what the theater looks like, right? And Shakespeare's objective when he writes the plays is very simple, which is to sell a ticket for every single one of the seats, right? Both the rich seats and the poor seats, right? Everyone he wants to sell to in order to, well, make a bunch of money, right? So that is his objective there when he is making his plays. So how do you do that? How are you going to make sure that people come to see the play? Well, same thing you do in order to make a successful movie nowadays. You're going to need some action, you're going to need some comedy, you're going to need romance, you're going to need drama, you're going to need some political intrigue, right? All of the stuff that sells out today is what would sell out in Shakespeare's time. And that's really what gets to the heart of why Shakespeare still gets studied today and why, people still like these plays. It's because, you've got these this audience that even though the technology is very different, they're using swords, they're using very primitive medical technology, everything like that. Even though there's all that, the way the audience acts and the ways they behave is very much similar to how we as a society act and behave today. We still like action, we still like comedy, we still like romance and everything like that. So that's part of what makes Shakespeare so interesting is that even though these plays are about 500 years old, uh, the messages inside of them and the attitudes and the drama itself are still very much well liked. But there's one major difference between our society and Shakespeare's society, which is the treatment of women. So in Shakespeare's time, there were no actresses allowed, right? If a woman stood on that stage that I have a picture of here and spoke and was seen, she would be considered to be like a prostitute, right? It was very much forbidden in Shakespeare's time for women to be on the stage, right? So that was considered to be sinful, right? If a woman did something like that. To the point where the Catholic Church, at least in France, would not give you a proper burial if you were a woman who is an actress in France, right? So it was considered sinful, it was considered awful, right? So a woman could not get on the stage in Shakespeare's time. And for those of you who have not studied Shakespeare before, you might be thinking, well, okay, what about all these female characters in the plays, right? How did he have female characters if, there's no women to play them. So the answer to that is, well, what he did is he used 11-year-old boys, right? Or 11 and under, right? Boys who had not had their voices crack yet, right? And still talk like this in a high voice. I can't really do it. But, those boys who have very high voices, right, would be trained from basically the time they could walk, right, up until their voices crack, right? They would be trained up on how to play women, right? So, every single female character that you've encountered in Shakespeare, right? And I know many of you studied Macbeth, right? And you know Lady Macbeth, right? Lady Macbeth would have been played by a boy, right? And what that means for Shakespeare, incidentally, right, is that any female character he wrote had to be something a boy could do, right? So, this limits Shakespeare's uh, abilities when it comes to writing women, right? So, a legitimate criticism of Shakespeare is that his female characters tend to be a little two-dimensional. And, well, you have to remember that he was writing at a time when he can't actually use women. He has to use boys, right? So any part that would be played by Shakespeare would have to be played by a boy. Anyhow, let's talk about Othello. So, Othello is a unique play, right? Even among Shakespeare's plays, because it's the only play Shakespeare has with an African protagonist, right? So, there are other plays that have African characters in them, right? In one play, Titus Andronicus, there is an African character, and he's the bad guy, right? But this play is unique because the protagonist is himself African. And, that is an interesting thing, personally, for me to be teaching, especially in the current climate with the Black Lives Matter protests and everything like that. I mean, this is a play that opens with a black man being arrested for no reason, but nevertheless, that is one of the defining characteristics of this particular play, is that it's Shakespeare's only black protagonist. Now, let me give you guys some background about that. So, Othello, that's the name of the protagonist, is a Moor, right? Which is a term, I think slightly offensive term, that references Morocco, right? So, if you look at this old map uh, of Europe, right, you'll see that England is here. And if you go over to England, or go over to Africa, the first place you reach is Morocco, right? So that's why the English typically would call anyone from Africa a Moor, right? So, Morocco was the closest place to England from uh, or the closest place from Africa to England, right? So they called everyone from Africa Moor. So Othello, the character, there's been a lot of debate over the years about his skin color, right? And it could be that Morocco is, light black. Where are they? There they are. Like a Tunisian, right? You see Tunisian people, they're sort of very light brown. Or he could be darker like a Somali, right? We don't know exactly what Shakespeare meant when he wrote this character. But the thing to know is that whether he's light black like a Tunisian or dark black like a Somali, right? He's supposed to be a black man living in a white society, right? And let me tell you, Shakespeare's society was anything other than multicultural, right? This is not a society that's diverse, right? Uh, this is a time when you could go through most of your life, right, and probably never see someone of a different skin color, right? There was colonization going on, right? It was certainly, English people were going to settle North America, for instance. Oh, and before anyone asks, yes, the slave trade was happening during this time, But for a person in England, they, especially someone like Shakespeare, they would not be meeting African people so frequently, right? And if they did, it would be something sort of unusual. Oh, I should also mention, because I know this stuff is going to come up given what kind of play this is, uh, the African slave trade is happening right now in the Atlantic, or rather during Shakespeare's time in the Atlantic, right? That is happening. Shakespeare is a playwright in London, and I don't want to get into the weeds here, but the rule of England was that slavery was forbidden in the English islands, right? So it was against the law to have a slave in England, but you could have a slave in their colonies over in America. So slavery was illegal for Shakespeare, right? Shakespeare did not own a slave or anything like that. He was not involved in the slave trade, right? But his country, right, the country he was part of, was engaging in the slave trade at that very moment, right? So, yeah, so take that as you will. But Othello is no slave, right? What Othello is he's a mercenary, right? So going back to the map here, a mercenary is someone who works for money, a soldier that works for money. And what would happen during the 16th century, right, is you see here the southern states here, the so-called Barbary states, right? Tunisia, Algeria, and Morocco, right? They were Muslim states, right? As was the Turkish Empire, or the Ottoman Empire, I should say, in the east, right? These are the Muslim states, right? And you had, of course, the rest of Europe as the Christian states. And the mercenaries, well, they want to make money, right? They want to get as much cash as they can, right? Because being a mercenary is being a business. So if you're a mercenary group, right, and you hear, hey, there's a very rich city in Europe called Venice, and they're looking for some mercenaries to help defend their city, right? And it's a good deal. It's a good pay, right? And you're down in Tunisia, right? What you might do is you'll get your mercenaries on a boat, you'll sail all the way to Venice, and you'll get there and say, hey, we're mercenaries. And what the employers will ask you is, well, hang on, this is a kind of important question. Are you Christian or are you Muslim? Right? And if you're a mercenary and the guy you want to work for is Christian, then of course you're going to say Christian. And then if you go back to work in Africa, right, and you're working for a Muslim now, right, then of course you're going to say, oh, I'm Muslim, of course, right, because, well, what you want to do is make money, right? So mercenaries would go back and forth, right, and they would convert to whoever is going to be in their financial interest to convert to, right? So if you're an African mercenary working in uh, Europe, right, then you might have to convert to Christianity in order to work, right? And if you're a Christian mercenary working in Africa, you might have to convert to Islam to do the same thing. So that's typical of the time, right? They called this being renegades at the time. So that is how we meet Othello, right? Othello is a mercenary from Africa, right, who's working in Venice, right? And he's the best mercenary there is. He's a great military leader. So he goes up to Venice to work there, right? And in the process converts to Christianity. Now, let's get to the actual play. I posted the PDF of the play's text on the website yesterday, right? So you can find it right there, Othello.pdf. This is a good version of the play because it has annotations, but guys, I would vastly prefer for you guys to be looking at, the actual text, like a book like the Macbeth one, but we work with what we can online. So it's a big PDF, right? And you're going to have to scroll down a bit in order to get to the actual play, right? The actual play begins on page 28 of the play, right? And uh, the way you read this is, it is a play, right? And you guys have read plays before, so I hope you know what you're doing, right? You have at the beginning Rodrigo and Iago coming in, right? And they're talking about something that's happening in the city, Othello. So uh, there are 2 pages for each scene, right? There's the actual text, right? Which is going through, that play. But you'll notice there are footnotes throughout the entire text, right? And then on the other pages, right, there's the explanation of what those footnotes mean, right? So it's a little weird to read in a PDF format, right? But the thing to know is when you've come across a word that you don't know, right? So, for instance, Iago says here at the beginning of Act 1, splud, right? And then there's a footnote here, 2, right? What you do is you find footnote number 2, and you'll see splud, an oath or curse meaning by God's blood, right? So, this is much easier when you have the book, right? And it's just, over here's the notes, over here's the text, right? That's a lot easier. But, we got to work with what we've got. If you open the text with a PDF reader like Foxit Reader, right, which is what I use, and you go into View and you put it into, what did I do? Continuous facing mode, right? So it's like this. That makes it a lot easier to read, right? Because then you have it so that the footnotes are on the right side of the screen and the actual text is on the left side, right? So that makes it a lot easier to read, right? So I highly recommend doing it like that if you can, right? Because then you can just have, be reading here and see the footnotes on the right side of your screen as you're going along. So I'll post a link to Foxit Reader. It's for PC and it's free on the website, right? So you get Foxit Reader, which is way better than Adobe Reader, by the way. Adobe sucks. So Foxit Reader, get that. You go to View, just like I am here, and you press this button, and it'll set it up just like I've got on the screen here, and that'll be a lot easier for you to read. Okay, so I think this video is almost half an hour already, so I probably should finish up here soon. So what I will say is for tomorrow, please read through, let's say, Act 1 and Act 2, and I'll talk a little bit about how you're supposed to read this, and the way we can perhaps go about seeing this play, right? Because, of course, Shakespeare's plays are meant to be seen. So I'll talk more about that tomorrow. I know this video is going a little long. So for tomorrow, again, read up to page 21, right? So just the beginning of the play here, right? Page 5 to 21 on the PDF page numbers, right? So remember, you don't have to read any of this stuff in the intro. I mean, you can if you want, if you're interested in Shakespeare and all that. You don't have to read any of this intro stuff. Just get straight down to the actual play, which begins, here, right? That's the part that we're concerned with. Okay, guys. So I'm totally out of time for today. I don't like having videos that are about half an hour or longer, right? So I'm going to wrap it up there. But we'll be going through Othello together as we go through. And if you have any questions about Othello or about Shakespeare, feel free to ask me. So I will see you guys tomorrow, and I hope you're all doing well.